Hey guys, I am wading in to this somewhat trepidatiously, but I think it needs to be done because a lot of the reporting I've seen on it has been, I believe, unfair and lacking nuance. And so I'm down here in the corner and we have the article up here. And this is an article from Gizmodo where you'll notice hot takes today in news are you are cheesing your cheeseburgers all wrong and I can't stand it anymore. And riding the sex saddle is like blasting your bits with a car engine. Hard-hitting news right here. Apparently people who like this article, like hamburgers and sex with a car engine, don't judge, okay? But in the backdrop of these hard-hitting related news stories is this really unfortunate betrayal of confidence that is at the core of this 8-page or 10-page, depending on where you ask, who's printing it. And it's described as a diversity screed or a manifesto, and I don't get that at all. I see it as the well-meaning ideas of a somewhat misguided, clearly socially awkward engineering dude at Google. And the press has run roughshod over him for clicks, and it's become this big hot take discussion topic. And what I feel is really unfortunate about that is I feel like a lot of his suggestions are actually really good. And they're not being heard because he stepped on a hand grenade resting on a bear trap when he brought up evolutionary biology. And I'll get to the specifics of that in a minute, but I want to say right off the bat, this is why private conversations should remain private. There is no cover-up here to expose. This was one guy voicing his opinion on, I assume, a board that was designed to voice opinions, essentially proving him right that Google has a problem with shame culture and that you can't have these discussions because people are more interested in shaming you than actually having a discussion about it. And this is unfortunate because guys like this, who start off his whole thing by saying, you know, he values diversity and inclusion. And here it is, not denying that sexism exists, don't endorse using stereotypes. Unfortunately, he uses some stereotypes of his own, but he's open to learning. He's open to having, you know, a discussion about this and being proven wrong. And I think that's super important. And I say this as someone who has to deal with some people who are not interested in broadening their horizons in this case. Now, what I have found is most people, if you don't attack them, if you're willing to have some patience and discuss something like, you know, an adult with some compassion, then people will usually be open to what you have to say. They're never going to agree with you 100%, and that's unfair to ask, but they will broaden the horizons. I have seen in the years since the whole Gamergate thing, people who were extremely pro Gamergate and still link me to Breitbart. And every time they do, I say, I do not click on Breitbart links. Breitbart is not a reliable source, but their personal opinions skew much more towards a progressive viewpoint. And so the problem is with these shame tactics and this, you know, j'accuse, to quote a moment in Ren and Stimpy. I know I'm dating myself now. Wow. But, you know, the problem is you push people towards these alt-right services where at least they're able to voice their deepest, darkest thoughts, right? The problem is something that is repressed or suppressed becomes stronger. That's true of any sexual fetish and political ideas. It's funny how the two things intersect that way, isn't it? What the guy's opening paragraph says is, to me, what I'm getting from him is that his issue is the inability to have a conversation, not being especially wedded to any particular viewpoint. And that's good. The problem is the evidence he offers up And I wish he had not included this stuff because it is a massive distraction. He had some really great ideas, but he starts drifting into, and I don't think he realized it because he uses some dog whistles. And the thing about dog whistles is that the reason it's called dog whistle politics is that it doesn't register on the people that aren't intended to hear it. It only lands on the people it's either designed to secretly motivate or, or offend. And it sounds like this guy's not hearing the dog whistle. And so he hears these ideas and go, oh, this is all quite logical, but it's really not. And the big mistake he made is arguing outside his specialty. This has been the Waterloo, I know that's a historical reference, sorry, of more very, very smart people, caring people than I can think of. This is why I'm very careful to say this is just my personal opinion, not a professional one, versus this is an area I feel like I have some expertise in. I can demonstrate some expertise. I have a track record on these issues. I can speak to this because I think it's very important that we don't confuse, you can't connect to this pain. You can't relate to what it's like in this particular portion of society, and you're not entitled to an opinion. They're very, very, very different things. Where this guy blows the whole thing up and gets it wrong, in fairness, but I don't think he deserved to be publicly shamed because other elements of this text show that his intentions are good, was his reliance on just faulty arguments and bad data when it comes to this idea of parity in the workplace. And this comes up a lot when it comes to these discussions where parity is a goal, not a quota. Most diversity programs now, they talk a good game. They talk about, 50-50. They talk about parity, but that's marketing. The reality is, and I say this as someone who has sat on these organizations when the numbers come in year to year and see the reactions, as long as the trend lines are moving in the right direction, that is fine. Is trying to attract women to these programs by making it seem like the environment is more open to female participation. That's all it is. And so I find this idea of we shouldn't expect 50-50 representation. We shouldn't expect 50% female because blah, 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 blah. It's a red herring. We are so far away from that we have to make that as a goal way in the distance. That's like final boss. That's like beat the game in a 120-hour RPG, like a Final Fantasy or something, and you just started the game. You're still on chapter 1. That's how far away from parity we are. It's foolish to even debate it right now. Where we're at with Google in real terms, and this is from a year ago, but there hasn't been much change. 69% of Google employees are now male. 31% are female. And I think it's interesting that there is no indication for other. And I expect at Google, there are a few others. Here's the number that's really concerning. While 31% of all jobs at Google are held by women, only 19% of technical roles are held by women, whereas 81% are held by men. That's a 1% increase, as they call, which is nothing. Okay? That's a rounding error. Google's about average in terms of women in technical jobs. 17% of tech roles are held by women. African Americans are at 1%. Now, African Americans make up 10% of computer science degrees nationally. In 1984, 37% of computer science majors were women. By 2014, that's dropped to 18%. So Google is on par with how many women are graduating in computer science. But what happened to all those women from the 80s who should still be working? This is cause for concern. What happened to those women in the 1980s? Where are they? Where are they working? Are they the ones that are still holding on to these jobs, and therefore the women getting computer science degrees now aren't getting hired? Or are they gone from the industry? What happened? Apparently, female engineers make up 50% of defense industry CEO positions. 50%. 50. And they started off in the exact same place where the idea of female engineers were strange in the business of blowing shit up. But they found that the women who took those obstacles of, as they say in this article, not feeling listened to, they took that, became better listeners themselves, and became stronger leaders. It says this trait becomes very important when you have management union issues, for instance. It also leads to more win-win decisions and less ego-driven results. The very technical, I don't think anybody can claim a stealth bomber is not a highly technical piece of equipment. These results fly in the face of this idea that there aren't more women at places like Google because men are more status driven. Apparently that ego driven status leads to bad decision making, at least in industries where lives are on the line. Now, the racial breakdowns are even more concerning because 59% of Google employees are white. Now, we know that there's a lot of international hiring that goes on at Google. That's why they flipped out about Trump's travel ban, right? And international students outpace Americans in STEM degrees. This study indicated that 57% of doctoral degrees in engineering, 53% of doctoral degrees in computer and information sciences, and 50% of doctorates in mathematics and statistics were earned by international students. Now, not all of them are going to be white. Sorry, not all of them are going to be non-white, but we know that there's a lot of people from East Asia, South Asia, places like that, where there are a lot of computer science degrees kicking around. Now, they list all Asians as a monolith, and it's only 32%. 7% are Hispanic, and 2% are Black. Now, we know that 10% of the computer science degrees are obtained by Black people, so there's a gap there. There's a statistically significant gap. And so if we're even using these numbers, stop hearing about the women thing for now, because I'm going to show you something else as part of the issue there that refutes another part of his argument. But even with the numbers we have, Google is lagging behind in its diversity. 2% of Google's total workforce, okay, not just technical jobs with computer science degrees, everything. 2% of Google's total workforce is Black. It is so bad that there's actually jokes in Watch Dogs 2 about it, about how Black people terrify Google employees. Because there were two whole Black people talking to each other in their Google-like company called Noodle, and they actually made a joke. It's like, go away, man, you're scaring the white people. This is an issue. This is an indication that Google still has work to do in, pardon the pun, Black and white. We're not going for 50-50 parity. We're not going for population, nothing like that. We're going by the number of people who get these degrees. Now, fine, Google is the best of the best. But 2% of your total workforce being Black? Now, this is all just his opinion, no problem. The problem comes here, the possible non-biased causes of gender gap in tech. He starts talking about men and women differing biologically. Run away, run away, run away, run away, because this science is all heavily disputed. The first statement, he says, that they're universal across human cultures, Unfortunately, we don't know that with certainty. Certain things like facial expressions, yes, we have studied them being universal across human cultures. But things like interests and preferences, one of the problems with evolutionary biology is evolutionary psychology is that the studies are heavily weighted in America and Europe. Now, I'm not going to hit the guy too hard on this, and prenatal testosterone, like, dude, you're an engineer. Stop talking about human physiology. It's a bad idea. The best thing to do in these circumstances is to just say, look, here's some evidence. I don't know. I am not an expert in this field. The problem he makes here is he talks like an expert in this field, and he's not. They're exactly what we would predict from an evolutionary psychology perspective. And he gets into personality differences and all this stuff. Now, higher drive for status, this, that, and the next thing. Now, the problem is we have data that shows that the attitudes that women have towards tech change over our lifetimes, which indicates a social, not a biological origin. You'll see it's a handy dandy chart. I will put a link to this if you want to go and read it. But there is a spike in interest in computing in middle and junior high school. It plummets in high school and it increases in college again. And the reasons given shorthand is the idea that computing is for girls is impressed upon junior high school students or middle school students in most people's areas. They get hands-on time with computing, with good teachers, and they see computing as cool. In high school, that completely reverses. Computing isn't taught, and they don't find it fun. What? Clearly comes down to quality of teaching. Girls are just not getting the hands-on time in a way they like with their peers, because you notice in number 3 thing, a full third of girls said that no friends were studying computers in high school. Now, this is only a few years. If it was biological, if it was brainstem, if it was lizard brain, you wouldn't expect to see this swing that then goes up in adulthood. And, oh, the body is being flooded with estrogen and blah, 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 blah. No. These are social factors that it's not taught and their friends aren't there. That has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with social factors. And my rule of thumb, based on looking at a lot of these phenomena, is you have to eliminate the social factors before you cite a biological cause, because biology is one of those things that is running in the background. But social forces can overpower biology to an undeniable extent. So if there is a social cause, eliminate that before you give a biological cause. And we cannot eliminate the societal causes for why there are so few women in computer science. And what the article says here is they have this really cool mantra: you cannot be what you cannot see. And this is true for the issues facing young men. This is true for the issues facing young women. Without mentoring, without role models, you cannot be what you cannot see. And so while Google Dude is right that there is a gap, we don't have to go to this silly biological thing and this idea that men have a higher drive for status. Boy, please, you've clearly never gone shopping with a bunch of women. Like, you've never gone clubbing. You've never been involved in a wedding. Status matters intently for women. Status just means different things. And that's social. Again, the social indications of status are significant here. Now, despite these errors, his suggestions are actually pretty good, but everybody was freaking out by the time he got to this point. The idea of making software engineering more people-oriented is something that Google did already. And full disclosure, I hate it. This wouldn't work for me. This idea of open workspaces where everybody just lounges on a laptop. I miss the days of an office where you could go somewhere and get quiet and have alone time. The Googleplex model sucks for introverts. And so I actually think you need different types of workspaces for different types of people. Some are very social and collaborative, but there needs to be offices where you can close the door for people like me who are very introverted and need quiet to concentrate. Stop it, email. Screw you, Groupon. I don't know of anybody who likes being on an uncooperative team. So all these things, better work-life balance, more cooperation, a healthy balance between competitiveness and cooperation, all these are really good suggestions. He talks about the male gender role being inflexible. I agree with him. You know, all these discussions, all these suggestions are spot on. And if we're going to criticize him for his evolutionary psychology bullshit, and it is bullshit, it's not his fault, but he's not an expert, and so he misapplies some of this stuff, then we have to praise him for getting some pretty good solutions, even though the things he made his decisions based on were wrong. I like his suggestion that courses should not be like programs, mentoring, and classes only for people with a certain gender or race. It shouldn't be like that. Because one of the things that, you know, white dudes do need help with in our very complex socio-political times are how to appropriately associate with colleagues who are female, who are not white. All these things, they need the practice too. And if you're segregating your workforce, those white dudes never get that practice. Certain things you should be cautious of without being pedantic about it. A mistake a lot of people make, well-meaning people make, is they try to show how smart they are by making a statement instead of asking a question. You are a Muslim person, so you do not eat pork or drink alcohol. A lot of Muslim people I know do both. Because it's Canada, and because we allow people to keep their culture, they assimilate anyway. You know, there are lots of bars frequented by Muslim Arabs, and they are drunk. Because they're Canadian too. They've assimilated in the culture. They have chosen not to continue that element. And a lot of them are immigrants or children of immigrants, but that got left behind. So you can't make these assumptions, so ask. And that's sort of what this guy didn't do with this whole, you know, women thing. If he had just stated that, you know, women are generally seen to have more openness directed towards feelings and aesthetics without assigning a biological root, people probably wouldn't have freaked out. You know, if he had said women relatively prefer jobs or in social and artistic areas, oh God, not me. And that's the thing. A lot of the women he works with are probably exceptions to this rule. And so he offended them by the way he approached it. Instead of going, this is social science, this is science, this is incontrovertible, hard science. And here's the big problem with that. Because if you know anything about history, computer programming used to be women's work. And if you actually study the history of this issue, it's quite sad that the field of computer science was built on women because it was considered clerical. There's a quote on this article, and again, I will link it. As late as the 1960s, many people perceived computer programming as a natural career choice for savvy young women. Even the trend spotters at Cosmopolitan magazine urged their fashionable female readership to consider careers in programming. In the article titled The Computer Girls, the magazine described the field as offering better job opportunities for women than many other professional careers. As computer scientist Grace Hopper told a reporter, programming was just like planning a dinner. You have to plan ahead and schedule everything so that it's ready when you need it. Women are naturals at computer programming. Jane Addams, a director of education for the Association for Computing Machinery, agreed. I don't know of any other field outside of teaching where there's as much opportunity for a woman. Now, what happened? Well, instead of women seeing computer programming as an easy job, it became, oh, this is really hard. The social perceptions changed. And as you'll see here, and this is from the Smithsonian, not some Huffington Post or Mike or Vox or something like that, male programmers wanted to elevate their job out of the women's work category. Because don't forget, back then there was a lot of stigma. There's still stigma on men who do so-called women's work, but it was even more intense back then. The male computer programmers created professional associations and discouraged the hiring of women. Ads began to connect women staffers with error and inefficiency. They instituted math puzzle tests for hiring purposes that gave men who had taken math classes an advantage, and personality tests that purported to find the ideal programming type. Now, what does that mean, men who had taken math classes an advantage? A lot of women were trained on the job or didn't have the college courses. If you saw Hidden Figures, you may remember that plot line where the Janelle Monáe character had to push to take classes in white classes because she needed them for the particular job she wanted. A lot of women did not have those advanced classes. They could do the job, but they were trained on the job. So a train leaves the station at blah, 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 and goes at blah, blah, blah velocity, and the other one goes, they weren't familiar with those. And they have found that aptitude tests do hold biases based on these lived experiences. It's interesting science, but the quote is, according to test developers, successful programmers had most of the same personality traits as other white-collar professionals. The important distinction, however, was that programmers displayed disinterest in people and that they disliked activities involving close personal interaction. It is these personality profiles, says Ensmenger, that originated our modern stereotype of the antisocial computer geek. It is a manufactured preference. And this is where we get into problems with issues like this. And so Google Guy is right. There are blinders. There are biases. Some of them are what he claimed they are. Some of them aren't. But this is precisely why I think this conversation should have stayed private and not been blown up in the media so the guy got harassed and shamed. This should have had an internal conversation, and when it sparked an issue, meet over drinks, meet over coffee, do that socialized thing. You meet in a relaxed environment and discuss this stuff and have somebody with some moderation skills to stop it from getting too heated. Make sure everybody feels heard. Have this discussion internally. And then when you have that discussion, then publish your findings. And the problem with recognizing the history and the science of this gap in computing is that the guy's right that the culture of coding will change with a diversity mandate. It will become less antisocial. It will not benefit people with a particular personality type as much, because the thing that benefits those personality types are the cultural aspects of a job, not the actual skills required to do the work. And I know this from firsthand experience. Like I said, I need quiet. And I used to have to work at Much Music where it was open everything. There was so much white noise. They weren't even cubicles. They were just desks rammed together. And so you were sitting there and people would come over and they would read your screen and the guy across from you would start Googling you. So this guy Googled me and like read out an essay I'd written in grade 9 that was on some government website. And I ended up going to the quietest parts of the building in the hallway and writing in notebooks, because this is before I had a laptop computer. I could not handle just the overwhelming noise. If you want people like me who are very, very, very good at production, you have to create the conditions, salary included, for me to want to work at your company. And somebody like me who actually believes that I'm an asset to a company, so much so that I went independent and I'm making a go of it. I'm not anywhere near rich, but I'm keeping my head above water, barely. A year and a bit in, that's pretty good. So I clearly know what I'm doing. I clearly have skills. And if cultural elements are keeping me out of various companies, game journalism, excuse me, that's an issue. And that, the flaw is with the companies. The flaw is with the corporate culture. The flaw is with the non-job related demands that are placed on employees. And there are certain things that, getting along with people, ability to handle stress, all those are very important. The guy's right. There are different kinds of stress. For me, deadlines and organizational stresses and the stresses of getting a quality product in a decent amount of time, no problem. I can handle those stresses. The interpersonal backbiting crap, I am out. Now, that's not true of a lot of these companies that if you say the wrong thing on an intercompany message board, you get publicly shamed. This is nonsense. This is a failure in leadership at Google, that this has become such a big issue. And it shows that, like the guy said, they do have a problem. And that's an unpopular opinion, but I probably cheese my cheeseburgers wrong too. And I think we kind of have to say this. Well, I don't agree with the guy in his comments on women, and I have every right to do that. I'm not going to crucify him because I see him trying. And if we attack people who are trying and say things awkwardly, all people had to do was sit this guy down and show him other research. This could have been solved. He could have gotten his head on straight. Other people could have had the value of the fact he took initiative. And reading between the lines, it seemed like he was somewhat egged on. There's little things about, I've gotten many personal messages from fellow Googlers expressing their gratitude for bringing up these very important issues, which they agree with, but would never have the courage to say or defend because of our shaming culture and the possibility of being fired. This needs to change. Yeah, with a company that's like, what, 70% white men? I think a few people, more than a few people at Google agree with this guy. And they just won't say so because they'd rather put the bug in a guy like this ear who is kind of honest to a fault and way too trusting. And they'd rather he blow up, have he suffer the negative consequences, but they benefit because then we have the conversation anyway. And that's not right either. I feel really bad for this guy.